everyone for continuing to be here on our last day. All right, so speaking illustrations, performing Scriptocentrism in Gallienne Alice in Wonderland. Dwight Coppergood, in his essay, Performance Studies, Interventions, and Radical Research, presents the conflict between ways of knowing within performance studies research, theory and practice, and how in academia, the privileging only of theory and the denial of practice is to overlook other forms of knowing within subjugated communities. He writes, quote, "The promiscuous traffic between different ways of knowing carries the most radical promise of performance studies research. Performance studies struggles to open space between analysis and action, and to pull the pin in the binary opposition between theory and practice. This embrace of different ways of knowing is radical because it cuts to the root of how knowledge is organized in the academy." The aspect of Coppergood's argument in which this project finds its lens is in his usage of the term Scriptocentrism, which he describes as a hallmark of Western imperialism. What I'd like to suggest is that a similar Scriptocentrism exists artistically within adaptations, as the privileging of text over adaptation is considered typical. The book was better than the movie, as the saying goes. The artistic privileging of literature mirrors the privileging of text within academia, as it is often academia that dictates what literature is actually literature. Such designations of hierarchy are ghosts of Victoriana, where the novel is viewed as the highest form of cultural production. All else rests in its shadow, no matter how closely they try to stand. I received a copy of this photograph from Alice in Wonderland Authority collector and Lewis Carroll Society of North America member, Mr. D.M. Crandall. He purchased it from the Eva Le Gallienne estate, current owner Eloise Arman, in the summer of 2001. To anyone familiar with the works, the photo is easily recognizable as the scene of the caucus race in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I turned to Charlie Lovett's catalog of early Alice productions, which lists the Le Gallienne production as the 62nd production of a stage adaptation of a Carolian work. He lists Le Gallienne, Eva, and Florida Phoebus, Alice in Wonderland, presented at the Civic Repertory Theater in New York, beginning 12 December 1932, transferred to the New Amsterdam Theater on Broadway on 3 February 1933. The production subsequently toured parts of the US. He lists the first revival as presented by the American Repertory Theater at the International Theater in New York, beginning April 4th, 1947. Celebrated actress Eva Le Gallienne founded the Civic Repertory Theater in 1926, where she produced, directed, and starred in more than 30 plays within the 7 years of the theater's existence. While Le Gallienne was best known for performing in and producing classics like Ibsen, Chekhov, and Shakespeare, in the 1932 to 33 years, the production company's final years, she produced her own adaptation of Wonderland and Looking Glass, with script assistance from her set designer, Florida Phoebus. It was a shrewd financial move given the rise of public interest in Alice in 1932, as we discussed yesterday in Will Brooker's talk. But for a theater known to produce classics, to take on Alice was a choice telling of the cultural atmosphere of elevating Alice as high literature. The production ran from December 12, 1932 to December of 1933. The American Repertory Theater, which Le Gallienne had helped to organize in 1946, only lasted one season due to financial difficulties, mixed reviews, and divided leadership. Its revival of Alice only ran from April 6th to June 28th. When the production was revived yet again in 1982, the 50th year anniversary of the original production, Le Gallienne reprised her role of the White Queen at the age of 83, and it was her last stage appearance. Alice was portrayed by Kate Burton, while Richard Burton played the White Knight, and it is the only production or film to star the father and daughter together. The production, which began in late 1982 and ran into early 83, was recorded by the Broadway Theater Archive and shown on TV by PBS. However, the run lasted only 21 regular performances, and it was, to put it gently, a bit of a flop. just as the 1947 revival was before it. Though the 1932 Alice was able to run for a full year, both the 1932, even though the 1932 Alice was able to run for a full year, both the 1947 and 82 productions ended their companies. The 82 production is remembered only for its PBS run, and by extension, what keeps Le Gallienne in the public memory. The fact that the original production was in 1932 is significant, as that was the centenary of Dodgson's birth. The year marked a massive media event surrounding all things Alice. Firstly, an exhibition was held at Columbia University, at which Miss Alice Hargreaves attended in order to accept an honorary degree. The exhibition was so successful that a similar exhibition was held in London by J.E. Bumpus Limited. Its widely publicized opening ceremony was marked by the now oft-cited opening speech by J.C. Squire, with other speakers like Mrs. Hargreaves, the Dean of Christ Church, and Stuart Collingwood, who was Dodgson's nephew and first biographer. There was also the publication of the Lanford Reed, The Life of Lewis Carroll biography, which Carolyn Leach, in her study of Carroll biographies in The Shadow of the Dream Child, describes as both completely barking mad and highly influential in creating the modern myth of Carroll. The importance of the centenary was not just bringing Alice to the United States, as it was sometimes described in the media, like Alice in U.S. Land, a Paramount newsreel about the event. It was also about establishing Alice as real literature by celebrating and honoring Carroll/Dodson as an important contributor to English literature, which Columbia conveyed by bestowing the degree to Mrs. Hargreaves. The media coverage and public interest surrounding this event was so great that it indirectly influenced Paramount Pictures to produce their own Alice in Wonderland film in 1933, the first large-scale Alice film done by a major production company. Paramount, still under the studio system, brought out the full stable of stars such as Gary Cooper, Cary Grant, and W.C. Fields. Nowhere else can you see Cary Grant in a giant turtle suit and calf head mask singing Soup of the Evening, Beautiful Soup. The screenplay, it is worth noting, was heavily influenced by Le Gallienne's script, which was still playing at the time the production began. Alice has always suffered from the criticism of being only for children. For instance, take this excerpt from Punch magazine, reviewing the 1886 Saville Clark adaptation of Alice in Wonderland, the first major production which was massively successful. Quote, "But mind you, it is not a work to please the elders. What delights the little ones will not suit their parents and guardians, who must be content with taking a back seat and being enchanted to see a theater filled with children thoroughly enjoying themselves." End quote. Not only is the show not suited for adults, its only perceived value for an adult is in what it does for children. Alongside the apotheosis of the novel is the Victorian era's creation of the child as a separate entity from the adult, which leads to the creation of children's as an artistic genre. The parents might be sitting in the theater with their children, but they perceive themselves as being in a completely separate world. However, by 1932, Alice wasn't just for children anymore. By taking on a production of Alice in Wonderland in this significant year, Le Gallienne was working with a specific cultural moment of redefining Alice in an elevated tone. While even the most notable Alice productions frequently suffered the criticism of being meant only for children, the Le Gallienne production was trying to embody the literature, which was now being exalted as more than just children's books. As I might suggest from having seen the recording of the 1982 revival, in many ways the show was not particularly child-friendly given the somber tone of its delivery and the slow, plodding pace. And that is nothing to speak of the peculiar prologue that features Kate Burton in her Alice costume, meditatively smoking a cigarette in her dressing room. But what does this photo exactly tell us? The exact purpose of the photograph is unclear just by its composition. It does not seem framed well enough to have been for publicity, as there is a great deal of floor in the photograph and the camera is pointed at such an angle that the viewer can see the backdrop ending abruptly in the stage right wing. Alice, the star, is at an unflattering quarter profile, her back almost completely to the audience, and is not centered in the frame but off to the right quarter. The fact that the photograph was developed and kept in Le Gallienne's collection would imply that it was just for documentation, either official or personal. The scene is immediately recognizable as the Caucasus race. Everything from the backdrop to the anthropomorphic costumes to Alice's dress directly reproduces the Sir John Tenniel illustrations, specifically one of the mouse telling his long, sad tale, and that of the dodo presenting Alice with her thimble in chapter 3. Only a few of the characters are on stage, just the eaglet, the lory, the mouse, the dodo, and Alice. The large and conspicuous crab in the foreground is just a set piece. All of these characters, only and exactly these characters, speak within the text. The presence of only 5 characters on stage when a large crowd is supposed to be conveyed is assisted by the backdrop, which also features reproductions of the Tenniel illustrations. To call them imitations gives too much artistic credit. Pulling prominently the owl, goose, and another eagle from the Tenniel dodo illustration. What best conveys the Tenniel-esque quality is the cross-hatching effect, directly from the original illustrations, which are the distinct artistic feature of woodblock engravings. Their presence in the set and costume design heightens the effect of illustrations come to life. By reproducing Tenniel's illustrations, Le Gallienne's production seeks to more closely tie itself to the original literary text, following the scriptocentric notion that the text is a privileged item, and that closer association with the text will validate the cross-media adaptation. It tries not to be its own item, but an embodiment of the privileged text. I suggest that the Tenniel illustrations and the Carol text be approached as a married object in this case, as each facet is intricately tied to one another, the Tenniel illustrations even more so. The process of creating woodblock engravings takes several steps. Tenniel began with sketches and size outlines, but did not create pen and ink illustrations as the final product of his work. Instead, he prepared the woodblocks for the engraver with his vision. Distinguished Carolian scholar Edward Wakeling described the process, quote, Tenniel then transferred the outlines of the value study onto tracing paper, and that would in turn be transferred very faintly onto the prepared surface of the woodblock. Hence, his final drawing for the illustrations did not survive the process. The engraver destroyed it in the process of making the engraving, end quote. The necessary destruction of the paper element in order to proceed to the next step outside the illustrator's hands is eloquent in its expression of the image's lack of autonomy in this case. Tenniel's final illustrations do not exist outside the publications in which they were printed and the physical tool crafted to make those printings. In that way, those images cannot be separated from the text they accompany. Leonard S. Marcus, a children's literature historian, supported this notion in his children's literature review of the Pennyroyal Press edition of Wonderland. While that edition supplants Tenniel's illustration with Barry Moser's, Marcus immediately remarks in his review that the woodcut engravings by Sir John Tenniel, prepared for the earliest published editions under Carroll's watchful eye, have somehow remained so nearly synonymous with Wonderland and Looking Glass reality as to seem the inseparable twin of Carroll's elusive art. This instance of visual art being so inextricably associated with a literary text would suggest a rare simplicity in adapting the text to another visual medium, but this is not necessarily the case. This is another photograph I received from Mr. Crandall. The photograph is particularly interesting because what it tells us about the problems of how to both cast and depict Alice in stage and film adaptations during this cultural moment. Even though Hutchinson's Alice costume exactly mimics the dress of Tenniel's Alice, whose body proportions are mostly that of a child, though not exactly, as Tenniel refused to use a model, with the skirt hitting her exactly at the knee as it does in the illustration. This only emphasizes the distinctly adult proportions of Hutchinson's body, most obviously in her long legs. However, the set design of the show tried to compensate for Hutchinson's adult size by creating oversized set pieces. As you can see in the production photo, Hutchinson is dwarfed by the massive armchair, which exactly mimics the chair produced in Tenniel's illustration for Chapter 1 of Through the Looking Glass. The chair is not a painted backdrop, but an actual usable set piece that looks as if it were carved into existence by an engraver's knife, matching the mimic style seen in the backdrops and character costumes. The oversized chair puts a grown woman into the proportional relationship that the child Alice of the illustration has with her armchair. Hutchinson was 29 when the production began. However, there is nothing childlike about her. Though Hutchinson does not look exactly 29 in her pinafore and crinoline skirt, she looks like a teenager at the youngest, presenting this Alice as a potential sexual object. Additionally, if Hutchinson's performance was anything like Kate Burton's in the 1982 revival, she did not assume any child affectations in her movement or speech. This aging up of Alice is likely a side effect of Hollywood sexualization. The 4 Alice films prior to 1932 had Alices played by young women, not little girls, as did the 1933 Paramount Pictures Alice in Wonderland. The Paramount Alice starred Charlotte Henry, who was 21 years old, and looked it. However, the implications of an aged-up Alice is not just the Scothic pleasure of looking at starlets. There's the matter of genre shifts. Gone were the days of the stage productions with child stars, like the 12-year-old Phoebe Carlo in 1886 Saville Clark Alice in Wonderland. The way in which Alice was told, and arguably the audience it was meant to reach, had changed. Child actresses were a feature of children's theater, a double denigration. If Alice was to be elevated beyond and above that defining line separating children's literature and children's theater from real art, children had to be removed, at least somewhat, from the equation. Le Gallienne seems uncertain of how to approach the conflicting needs for an aged-up Alice, as well as the needs for certain fidelities to the original text, thus suffering a dual anxiety over the value of children's literature as opposed to real literature, and the value of artistic adaptations into different media as opposed to the original, usually of a higher ranked form in the artistic hierarchy. Thus we have grown women in oversized armchairs. To return to Conquergood, he refers to ephemeral or immaterial knowledge that resists being captured fully in writing, recorded in documentation, or archived. But a theater production such as Le Gallienne's is a reversal or even a betrayal of that idea. She created an ephemeral knowledge, that is, the experience of a theatrical production, which is a physical and sensory as well as psychological experience, that relies on the written archive, so much so that it has little hope of artistic autonomy, and denies the strength and validity of adaptation that embraces the space of difference and freedom created by shifts in medium. The hierarchy of epistemology that Conquergood proposes is similar to the artistic hierarchy that Linda Hutcheon presents in her book, A Theory of Adaptation, with the specification to scriptocentrism, or logophilia, the term she uses. Quote, "For some, literature will always have axiomatic superiority over any adaptation of it because of its seniority as an art form. But this hierarchy also involves iconophobia, a suspicion of the visual, and logophilia, love of the word as sacred," end quote. Adaptations are denigrated, and any art form with an emphasis on children is denigrated, which creates an uncomfortable space of validity for something like a stage adaptation of the Alice books. The novel is a verbal work, full of puns, wordplay, and logic games. But what does that say for a theatrical adaptation with a stage full of physical bodies? If the 1982 revival is a faithful revival, which I believe it was, then neglect of the body was part of what made the show so dull. The show put a great deal of effort into tableaus. With the rigidly Tenniel styling, the performance was like the illustrations coming alive to speak, and only speak. The point point is well illustrated by the choice in the production to have only the eaglet, Lori, Mouse, and Dodo appear as actualized characters, while the rest are just depicted in the painted backdrop. It's those 4 characters that speak in Carol's text, and 1 duck who is excluded, while the rest are only described as several other curious creatures, and only find specification in the illustrations. They do not speak, so they are banished to the background. Alice has its verbal genius, but it's also a sensory story, full of bodily existence of eating and physical transformation. The sense of the body and its physical experience were lost in the production, and thus the enjoyment of watching bodies do things, over its anxiously forced proximity to the words. The logophilia, born of scriptocentric hierarchies within cultural power structures, took the physical element out of the theater experience. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
You said that the 47 and 82 productions essentially ended their theater companies. Was it truly that they ended because of those productions, or was it coincidental?
You know, that's interesting, because it's the problem that you deal with any revival, when you revive a stage adaptation, or a stage production again later on, because you have to make a choice of how much you want to keep the same in a revival, or how much you want to change to breathe new life into it. And what I think about the revivals and why they did so poorly is the fact that nothing changed from the 1932 production. They just brought the same show back, even though the cultural landscape of theater in the United States had drastically changed. The audiences had new expectations and new ideas of what theater should do in terms of being experimental and pushing the boundaries. And this Alice production didn't do any of that. So it stayed within the framework of the 30s, even though it was being revived again in the 40s and the 80s.
And do you think that's strictly because the Gallienne was doing her own revivals both times?
I think so. And, you know, performing her same role again, even though she was in her 80s. She was performing the same role she played in 1932.
Well, at least she wasn't playing Alice.
That's true. An 80-year-old Alice would be really something. Yeah, James.
I was really thinking about other theatre productions at the time, because Alice, I think storytelling and performance is a major issue in Alice. If anything you think it doesn't make sense to stick to the text too much, then it would be Alice. So is this a particular problem that happened with the Alice plays, or were other theatre at the same time suffering the same kind of problem? Or was it a pivotal moment?
Well, adapting Alice in general is a mess. It's not easy and is rarely particularly successful. The fact that this 1932 production was successful at all is nothing short of miraculous. And it's really only because of the cultural context of the time that made it so successful. There was this interest in Alice, there was this elevation of Alice, so it just hit the exactly right time to be successful. But when you adapt Alice in general, it's just messy. And so, the way that the Gallienne production did this adaptation is very verbal. Pretty much word for word, all of Carol's dialogue is represented in the text, but it's all about the dialogue. There are nothing, the size changes that she goes through are completely omitted. And it's just focused on these conversations that she has with various characters. And while that is a faithful adaptation, in a way, it's not terribly interesting for a play.
As you saw with the translations, right? The literal word-for-word translations are the worst, and the books that don't reprint the pictures are just...
Exactly.
I just don't know how people don't understand.
Exactly. It's interesting to think about this other production that came out in the 60s by Andre Gregory, which was a small production and had a small run in this barn in rural New York. But it was incredibly successful because it was very experimental, and in a way was not a very faithful adaptation in what we would consider a faithful adaptation of having the exact same words. But it did something new with Alice, and it was the sort of Alice that audiences were hungry for, this different, darker, edgy Alice that was breaking the rules. So Le Gallienne's production really didn't break any rules. It was very rigidly Corollian. Yes?
When you mention adaptations, and I haven't actually seen this, but didn't they do recently in New York like a very inventive, wasn't it called like As She Fell or Then
Yes.
She Fell?
But Then She Fell. Yeah, it's a production done by the same people who did, the Macbeth, Among the Sleep or something like that, where...
Sleep No More.
Sleep No More, thank you. Sleep No More. It was done by the same people who did Sleep No More, and it was a truly inventive and experimental piece because it is audience driven. What you do is you enter this building, this abandoned building, and wander around the building, and things are just happening throughout the building. So the audience has this kind of autonomy in what they would view. It's like you can go into a room and a scene is happening. You can stay and watch that scene, or you can move on to different spaces. Things are happening simultaneously. So no matter how many times you go to see it, you're going to see something different depending on just how you interact with the space.
It was real. I mean, it had a significant run, right? I mean,
Yeah, it got extended and extended and extended because it was just so wildly popular.
And I have one more tacky question.
Yeah.
'Cause, you know, didn't Le Gallienne and the gal who played Alice, weren't they having an affair?
That is true. Le Gallienne had an affair with her Alice, which was quite a scandal for the 1930s, as you might imagine. It's an interesting story, really, because
It's a cute story.
they started off in a production of Peter Pan together in 1928, I think. Where Le Gallienne played Peter and Josephine Hutchinson played Wendy. And at that time, Josephine was married to a man, obviously. And it was this huge scandal that they had this affair. And in the divorce proceedings, her husband cited Le Gallienne as the reason for the divorce. So, I mean, just huge scandal about it, and they stayed in this affair for several years in a pseudo-spousal relationship. So it does create some questions about an artistic working relationship when there's a romantic relationship also happening. Was Hutchinson cast as Alice because she was the director's lover? Hard to say. Yeah.
Was Le Gallienne a driving force in causing the 80s revival to happen, or was she merely invited back nostalgically to play the role of the Queen?
I don't really know. From what I know of Le Gallienne, I wouldn't be surprised if she was the driving force. She was an incredible theater maker, and just, I mean, she both wrote and directed and starred in her own production company in the 30s, a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And so talk about just a force of power artistically in demanding that things happen. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was her own workings. And it was supposed to be for the 50th anniversary of the production. So in a way, it was specific to the time. But it was her last production that she was in at the age Anything else? Yeah, Francis.
Yeah, I found it really interesting, and I wish you could have gone on a little bit longer. And that's basically what I'm aiming for. You made clear very vividly this transition from the early Alice adaptations, which were mostly by child actors, and indeed Lewis Carroll himself wanted it to be child actors. And when you first started off, to the adult Alices, and then you hinted at the fact that there was this hunger for weird and edgy, rule-breaking Alices. And, we talked about this right at the beginning of the conference, so we're coming back to it, that, now Alice is this dark Tim Burton-esque,
Yeah.
adult character, and there's really not much child about her. And I was wondering whether you could explain a little bit more what happened after this, when, that hunger arose for different Alices, and how that maybe led to where we are today.
I think it has a lot to do with shifts in artistic communities, really, in the kind of art that's being made, because once you get to the 50s and 60s, you have postmodernism, which is all about breaking all of the rules. And once postmodernism started to seep into the public consciousness as the dominant art form, or the dominant ideology behind new art, Alice is going to shift with it, because Alice always shifts with whatever cultural moment is happening. That's what makes Alice so special. She is this changeling sort of character, and that she moves in order to fit wherever she finds herself. So I do think that the darker Alice is a reflection of darker times, in a way, in how we change how we feel about the nature of humanity. I mean, once we get into, the post-war existentialism, things get darker. Once we have postmodernism, things get darker. We're just sort of darker people, in a way, and so Alice has to be darker to match the audience and match the hunger that we have. Though it is a little sad that it sort of chases away children from Alice, and having a darker Alice. It brings to mind the Victoriana hierarchies of the child and the adult as being these very separate worlds. So the child Alice and the adult Alice are very distinct, and in a way the child Alice is a little pushed to the side in favor of this darker, more adult Alice.
That's fascinating, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, I always had a problem with adults playing Alice. And do you think it plays a role in the fact that the play was not popular? I mean, it was never, like Peter Pan was more popular as a play than Alice.
That's an interesting point. I feel like both films and stage adaptations really struggle when you have an aged up Alice, because it is the actress playing a child. It's always a little kind of creepy when the actress specifically is playing it as a child. It's just like uncomfortable, because it really emphasizes in a feminist way how women can be lessened in the power structures by having women depict children. And it's a similar thing of having a woman play Peter Pan. There's this idea that a woman can play a child boy much better than a man can play a boy. So it's again an issue of power structures. So I think a lot of the aged up Alices have the female actresses playing it in an adult way, because otherwise it just doesn't sit well. But again, it's a removal of the child from the equation. Do we treat Alice as not being a child anymore? I don't know.
I have a question along those same lines. Certainly, maybe with the rise of stardom, obviously with cinema, that people wanted to see stars. They wanted to see people that had already a career, which wouldn't necessarily be a child. And then also when you get into the darker Alices, you know, is there a question of theatrical capability? Like you couldn't maybe ask for that type of interpretation from a child, that you would need an adult actress that's got more to offer?
Yeah, I think that's actually very true. A little bit after the Gallienne production, there was this slew of productions where known Broadway actresses wanted to be Alice. It became this sort of coveted role of that stars would play. It's like these star actresses wanted to play. And when you think about it, it makes sense. It's such a recognized character that there's a certain social cachet to being Alice. But I've lost sense of what the other part of your question was.
No, just capabilities and
Yeah.
the desire to see stars do it. I mean,
Yeah,
Meryl Streep did Alice.
Yes, Meryl Streep did Alice, and oh, was that production not just the absolute best? It's my favorite production. It's called Alice in the Palace, and it's basically a vaudeville show, like a vaudeville act, where it's completely episodic, so that each little show that's done is one of the interactions with a Wonderland denizen. And Meryl Streep plays Alice, and she's actually rather childlike in how she plays it. She's very physical and is just throwing herself across the stage. She's not in a dress. For one, she's like wearing these overalls, so she's really, really physical in how she does it, which also matches the sort of vaudeville style. There would be more physical humor and just more dynamic interactions in terms of both verbal and bodily. But yeah, in terms of like actresses, the stars playing Alice, of course there was a shifting scene in whether or not you could have child actresses play. I mean, child labor laws. And so, but I guess there's also an idea that children aren't fit to play Alice. Like they don't have the artistic chops to play Alice, this demanding character. Anything else? Are we out of time? Okay. Thank you very much.